Praise God indeed. That's why we're here this morning, to exalt God, to exalt Jesus. I pray that in the preaching of his word this morning, the same would be done as we just did in our music, that Jesus would be presented in all of his glory and that you would be compelled to turn your affections towards him. When I use the phrase, the other side of the tracks, or the wrong side of the tracks, what comes into your mind? What do you think? The other side of the tracks. When we hear that, we recognize it's this idiom that reflects a dividing line. Something's on one side, another thing is on the other side. Railroad tracks that are demarcating perhaps an area where the desirables live and another area where the undesirables live. People on the other side of the tracks are not like us. They're different. And for probably all of us, different is distressing. Different in some ways seems even dangerous. It feels dangerous to cross to the other side of the tracks. Last week in the sermon that Chris presented, you heard the Pharisees ask, why does Jesus eat with sinners and tax collectors? What are they asking? Why does Jesus go to the other side of the tracks? Why does he go to people that we would think are different or dangerous? Get used to different. It's evening in the autumn of 28 AD. Jesus has just finished teaching all day, and his disciples have been with him, and they're probably tired. And Jesus is tired. They're probably thinking, this has been pretty amazing. Crowds gather more and more every time. Ministry is amazing. We're seeing Jesus teach and do great things. This has become a very familiar routine in our life. And at the end of that day, they're probably thinking, let's just do this again tomorrow. Let's go home, let's get some rest, and we'll come back and we'll do it again tomorrow. But Mark chapter 4, verse 35 says, on that day, the one I just described, when evening had come, Jesus said to them, let us go across to the other side. And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with them. On that day, when everything seemed familiar and they were getting into a routine of what it was like to follow Jesus, Jesus sends his disciples to the other side. And the disciples are different from the crowd. So they go. They're not there for what they can necessarily get out of this day, but they're there because they want to become like Jesus, remember? He's their rabbi. We want to be like him, so we're going to follow him wherever it is that he goes. So it says, leaving the crowd. We're not like the crowd. We will go. We're tired. It's been a long day, but he says, let's go to the other side. We will go where he leads. And it says they took him with them in the boat just as he was, just as Jesus was. We don't need a different Jesus. Just as he was all day, we will go with that Jesus. We're not worried about him. We'll go with him. It wouldn't be like this. It wouldn't be like the teenager whose dad says, well, I'll go with you to the event. And the teenager says, okay, but please don't embarrass me. Please don't say anything weird or do anything weird. No, they're like, Jesus in the boat. This is Jesus. We will go with him just as he is. And if he says go to the other side, then we will go there. Even though the other side is different. The place that he's asking them to go to that night is culturally different and, quite frankly, for them, spiritually filthy. It's a place that they're not comfortable going to. If you remember last week in the sermon about the party for sinners, where Jesus invites sinners and tax collectors and he has a meal with them, and the Pharisees are so troubled that he would cross to the other side, he says this in Mark 2:17, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick." And there's sick people over there, so let's go over there. I could hear him just turning to the disciples and say, you know how the disciples thought you guys were sick when I ate with you? Wait till you see what's waiting on the other side, where we're going. So far for the disciples, ministry has basically taken place around this area near Capernaum, which is Peter's hometown. It's where Jesus moved to after he left Nazareth. It's a very familiar environment to them. It's on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. It's steeped in Jewish customs and Jewish religion. It feels very comfortable to the disciples. But he says, let us go to the other side. Let us set sail for the Decapolis, which is on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, that has Greek customs and Greek religion. It's a place you may not feel very comfortable. It's a place that will have a heightened focus on sexuality, violence, a human understanding of truth, and that's it. This is going to be a place that feels uncomfortable. This is the place that rabbis of that time said, I don't want my followers to go there and attend the theater there, because the theater there is full of eroticism. It's full of sacrifice to other gods. This is not a comfortable place for these Jewish boys to go to. And Jesus says, let's go there. You Galilean fishermen, I've got a new fishing spot for you, but it's in unfamiliar waters. It may require some different bait. Things may smell a little different there. It's gonna be different. The other side, no matter what it is for you, when Jesus calls you to go there, will likely feel unfamiliar to your particular customs, and it will likely feel offensive to your convictions. That's the kind of place Jesus is calling his disciples to. When Jesus told the story of the prodigal son, and you remember that son said, I want my inheritance, I'm going to go do what I want. And he left his father, and he went to a land where there were pigs. Probably, he's referring to this area. It's a place full of pigs, which is not Jewish. They're not going to have herds of pigs. It's a place full of pagans. It's a place where a man is full of thousands of demons, as you would discover in chapter 5. This is an unusual place. It's a place where people are definitely far from God. And Jesus says, let's go there. Let's go there. And by the way, let's go in the dark. Let's go there in the dark. And the other side may feel dark. The journey there may feel dark. It may be difficult. It may be very daunting. Just last weekend, my family, we went up to the mountains to do a canoe trip for a few days. And we got to the mountains very late on Friday night, later than we had anticipated. And we had anticipated putting in and getting in some canoes and canoeing down a few miles and then setting camp. But we realized, no, it's going to be dark in like 15 minutes. So we loaded the canoes, hauled them down to the river, and just canoed out to a little island kind of on the other side of the river. And we're debating, do we camp here or not? And there was a bit of discussion, and then we realized it's dark. We really don't have any choice. Let's set camp here. So we got to the other side in the dark, which made it a bit difficult and daunting. The disciples are experiencing that. I wasn't alone. I had my family with me, and the disciples are not alone in crossing to the other side in the dark. And it's important to know that when Jesus calls you to go to some distant, different shore with him, that you don't go there alone. Deuteronomy 31:8. It is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. It is better to be on the sea in a boat, even when it's dark, with Jesus, than it is to be on a well-lit shore without him. So they're like, we're going. If Jesus is in the boat and he's going, we're going. Stay near Jesus and you will go far with Jesus because he's going. So if you stay near Jesus and he's going to the other side, inevitably you're going to the other side, even though the way to the other side is going to be full of barriers, going to be full of obstacles. They set sail to go to the other side in the dark, and in verse 37, and a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling. But he, Jesus, was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" So they set sail for the other side, and a great windstorm, it says, comes up. Now, in classic Greek, the word here for windstorm could easily be translated hurricane. This is a massive storm like they're not used to. And then it actually qualifies the hurricane as great, the Greek word megas. It's a mega storm. If there was a category system for storms on the Galilee, this is a 5. It is big. What Ida and Katrina were to the Gulf Coast, this storm is to Galilee. And I can imagine the disciples are thinking, whose idea was this? What are we doing out here in the middle of the sea with this going on? They're likely surprised. But as we know, barriers to the other side should not really surprise us. Peter said it this way in 1 Peter 4:12, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery, or in this case, watery trial, when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you." If Jesus is going to call us to go to unfamiliar places, we're likely going to encounter unfamiliar storms along the way. What threatens us from getting to the other side when Jesus calls us into those kinds of places? Because I guarantee you, when you start to travel to that unfamiliar place, you're going to have unmet expectations. You're going to have unanticipated frustrations. And these things are like storms that can certainly hinder your journey to getting to the other side. Last weekend, we got there late. We put in the dark. We canoed across the river. We stayed there. We got up the next day. We canoed. Eventually, we got to a place called Balcony Falls. It's the largest rapid in the 2 days or 3 days that we were canoeing on the river. It's not hard to run. It's pretty straightforward, but it's got the most water running through this narrow channel. And so I tell everybody when we go through there, by the way, here's what you can expect. You may not turn over, but it's very likely your boat will fill with water. It's just hard to go through there and not have water splash all into your boat. And when that happens, your boat becomes very uncontrollable. Your canoe becomes very heavy, and it's hard to navigate to the other side. And I think that's what happens for us many times. Even though we commit to go to the other side, a boat full of difficulties is very hard to control. It's very hard to get there. It's heavy. It doesn't turn in directions that we would like it to. And I think in the Galilee crossing right here, it doesn't say the waves were just hitting the boat or rocking the boat. It says the waves were filling in the boat. This boat is getting very, very heavy. And so when Jesus says, "Let us go to the other side. Let us love that person that you never imagined I would call you to. Let's get involved in that ministry to people that you never thought you would be ministering to. Let's do that." Chances are the boat may be heavy and hard to steer to get there for you because it's full of all kinds of unmet expectations, unanticipated frustrations. When Carl and I were called to Bolivia years ago and we went there to minister, man, we were high on a vision. We were going there to minister to kids through camping, which I had already done for 4 years here in the States. We were excited about the ministry. And on the day that we were heading to see the place, the camp that we were going to be ministering at for the very first time, we got in this Land Cruiser and went down this crazy road to get there, several hours of travel. But there were some obstacles along the way. Just to get to see the place the very first time, our kids had ear infections. Carl and I both had some sort of flu. We felt miserable. And on the windy road down, the cooler fell off the top of the Land Cruiser, and out went the antibiotics and busted on the ground. And we knew we would go days without antibiotics for our kids who had ear infections. We finally got to a gate that was supposed to open and let people through at certain times of the day, and it closed literally as we drove up to it, which meant we had to wait 5 more hours to just get through it, all of us sick, all of us miserable. When it finally did open up and we drove down and we pulled up to the camp, I jumped off so excited, and I got out and I was getting stuff off the top of the Land Cruiser, and I slipped and my shin scraped across the bar on the side and it was bleeding. I grabbed our video camera, I ran down to the bridge. I wanted to film my family coming across to this place that we had anticipated for so long, and Carl was up there, "Put the camera down, I've got sick kids up here, come and help me." All kinds of obstacles to get to the place that we were on fire about with a vision. And the same can be true for you. You might commit to going to the other side, and you have caught hold of a vision to reach people and to love people. You're committed to serve, and then your work schedule changes. And then your kids get sick. And then something better comes up that day that you'd rather do. Will you let it keep you from getting to the other side? What threatens you? What keeps you from getting to the other side? Disruptions in your life? Disappointments in your life? Divisions with people in your life could keep you from getting there. These are the things that fill your boat and make it hard to navigate. Disruptions. You committed to it, you're going, but then all of a sudden you find yourself spending time on things that you didn't even anticipate. I can guarantee you that when the disciples got in the boat and were committed to going to the other side, they did not anticipate having to bail water out of it. They did not anticipate having to deal with lowering sails in the middle of a storm. But those things had to be done. They had to be dealt with in order to get to the other side. Jesus eventually calms the storm, but he didn't prevent it from coming, and they've got to deal with the storm. So a question for you would be, will you give up on the journey to the other side just because of disruptions in your life? I'm not going there anymore. Too many disruptions. Or will you say it's worth it? Is it worth it to love that person? Is it worth it to go there? Better yet, is Jesus worth it? Because he's the one who called you to it. Is Jesus worth it to you? You do have to stop for a moment. You do have to bail your boat. You do have to attend to your need, or you'll never get there. I understand that. Bail your boat. Trim your sails. Deal with the disruption. But do so that you can get to the other side. Hebrews 10:36, for you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what is promised. Doing the will of God must motivate us. Going to the other shore, however, may not be the journey that you expected. It may not go just like you thought it would, and there's likely going to be disappointments that also fill your boat. This isn't what I had actually hoped for in my mind. So after all those barriers of getting to the camp in Bolivia, when we finally arrived and we crossed the bridge, we'd been raising support for years. We'd been preparing for this ministry. We knew, man, this is the place where we're going to bring kids, share Jesus with them, do camp programs. This is going to be awesome. And we walked across and we were like, whoa, what's that? Oh, that's an unfinished building. What's that cement slab? That's supposed to be like an outdoor sports pavilion thing. What's the hole in the ground? Well, that's going to be a pool. We realized, oh, there are some buildings here, but this camp is quite unfinished. We thought we went to be camp programmers, ministers of the gospel through programming, and we ended up being contractors for our first term, literally building a camp, raising funds to build the camp, hosting work teams. This is not what we expected. We were actually on that first day quite disappointed. You can sign on for a visionary ministry, and then the storms of disappointment hit. People drop the ball on the way. They leave you doing more than you ever thought, or something different than you thought. You were raring to go, man. You were good to go on this ministry, and then you end up doing all these menial tasks, and you think, how does this even relate to what we were called to do? Or maybe your ideas get heard, but they never really get put into practice. And you're disappointed. You thought it would be something that it didn't turn out to be. Is the vision strong enough to keep you going? Are you going to bail that out of your boat? Or will the divisions with people perhaps stop you? Tensions with people along the way that you disagree with. I can only imagine that in the boat, when they hit this storm, that the disciples approach it with their different personalities. And maybe I'm just too informed by the chosen here, but I can imagine Matthew speaking up in the boat and saying, I've done my calculations, and the likelihood of a storm coming up in the morning would have been far less than in the evening. Perhaps we should have waited. And then Peter says, shut up and drop anchor. We're going to die. And then the sons of Zebedee say, no, Peter, come on, we've got to row. Put your hands to the oars. Let's get moving. All these different ideas about what should have been done, or perhaps what they should be doing in that moment. And then there's division, and the division fills your boat. It makes it hard to navigate, and it threatens even getting to the other side. Strategy, I think, causes way more problems than vision. You'll buy on to a vision. Go to the other side? Yeah, let's go to the other side. How do we get there? Oh, now this becomes complicated. Know Christ and make him known? Awesome vision. Yeah, let's all get behind it. Oh, but not that way. Oh, don't use that, don't sing that song. No, not on that day. Strategy is really what causes the problem. I can get you sold on a vision, but when you get in the boat and start moving, and you have to do it with other people, and there's disruptions, and there's disappointments, and there's divisions, will we get to the other side? Tim Keller says, friends become wiser together through a healthy clash of viewpoints. And I believe that's what happens in the boat. Hopefully there was a healthy clash of viewpoints, because eventually they come to this collective wisdom, do they not? They land on a solution. They land on a strategy that they can all agree upon, and they turn and they go, let's wake him up. Let's wake Jesus up and talk to him. Good choice, disciples. Because when my boat is full of all of the disruptions, of all of the disappointments, of all the divisions, my world gets really small, really fast. And it becomes look out for number one right here. And the other side is no longer in view. I'm just looking right here. Why were we out here in the first place? Because I'm about to drown. My immediate need eclipses the vision. Once again, it's okay to bail your boat out. You need to do that. It's okay to tend to your own need. But in doing so, please never, ever, ever lose sight of the reason you're even out in the sea. It was to get to the other side. Do not lose sight of the purpose while you're tending to your own need. Your own personal care is ultimately, and I say this carefully, is ultimately not to serve you, although I recognize you need help in that moment. It's to serve God's will and ultimate purpose, to reach people that don't know him. So tend to your own need, but don't lose sight of the purpose. J.R. Tolkien wrote a little story called Leaf by Niggle. Niggle was this character. He's an artist. And he's commissioned to paint this painting on the side of one of the buildings at City Hall. And he has this dream, he has this vision. He's going to paint this beautiful, lush tree that bears fruit. And he goes down the first day and he begins to paint, and he paints one single leaf, and then he dies. And he finds himself on a train heading to heaven. And while he's on that voyage to heaven, he sees something that looks very familiar, and he asks the train conductor to stop the train. And he does, and he gets out, and he walks up to this image, and he realizes it's the tree that was in my dream. It's finished. It's complete. It's lush. It's green. It's producing fruit. And as he gets closer and closer to the tree, he sees one single leaf in the middle. That was his leaf. It was the one that he painted. And in that moment, he realizes, I was a part of something far more grand than I ever imagined. It wasn't for me to finish. It was simply for me to paint the single leaf. Purpose, my friend, will keep you sane in the storm. Realizing that the little part that you're contributing in that moment is part of a grander vision of God. Understanding that vision will keep you steering to the shore that God desires, no matter what fills your boat. And in those moments, when the disruptions, when the disappointments, and the divisions fill my boat, I must believe that God's vision and his direction are good because he is good. And this is a problem of the disciples in the boat. They have fear and they have doubt. Why? Because ultimately they doubt the good character of Jesus. And a mind full of fears and doubts is very hard to calm. The disciples might be thinking, Jesus, this was your vision, this was your direction, but they say, don't you care that we are perishing? Don't you care? They're questioning the good character of Jesus. And what we believe about Jesus will ultimately affect our response to him and anything that he calls us to. So the disciples are fearful. They turn and they look to the back of the boat, and what is it they see? They see an exhausted man. They see an indifferent teacher. They call him teacher. And they doubt that he even cares. Their circumstance causes them to question the very character of Jesus. So when a loved one dies in your life, when your children are faced with tremendous difficulty or maybe a disability, when you just can't get ahead financially, when a friend or a family member betrays you, do you begin to doubt the character of God? Does he care? Is he good? Romans 3:3, what if someone were unfaithful? Does their faithlessness nullify the faithfulness of God? By no means. My doubts, no matter how deep, do not nullify who God is. He is still good. Doubting God's character, I think, is probably the greatest barrier to getting to the other side for these guys. If Jesus doesn't care about us, then I don't care about who is on the other side, and I'm done. I think the greatest hindrance to getting to the other side is doubting the good character of God, but God is ready to remove any barrier that stands in our way. So we go on in verse 39, and he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? When God has a mission and he has called you to it, nothing will stop it. His mission will not be stopped because of your disruptions or disappointments or divisions or even doubts. He's going to accomplish it. So we went up to the mountains last weekend. We did that canoe across the river in the dark. We went through Balcony Falls. But you know why we showed up late in the dark? Is because we had a major disruption along the way. We had something that hindered us getting to the other side. We had 2 canoes strapped to a trailer, driving up through the Monitor Merrimack, pulling out on the other side of the Monitor Merrimack, probably going 60 miles an hour with a lot of traffic, and a guy pulled up beside me and said, "You lost a canoe." And I look back in my mirror, and sure enough, there's only 1 canoe on the trailer. I see no canoe in the highway. I start to sweat. I'm thinking, I surely caused an accident, and I may have killed somebody. I am a mess. My insides are in turmoil. I pull over, and Carla and Joel and Christian get out, and they start walking back to see if they can find the canoe. God, what did I say? Caroline. Carla stayed in the car with me, saying, "It's going to be okay, honey. It's all right. It's going to be okay." They finally came upon the canoe. There was a man with a truck, and he was strapping it onto the trailer that he had. And when they came up, they said, "Is this your canoe?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Man, that thing came off, and it was spinning like a roulette wheel in the middle of the highway. Nobody hit it. It didn't hit anybody. Everything's cool. Get in the truck. I'll drive you to your trailer." That was quite a hindrance. That was quite a moment when I was saying, is it worth it to keep going? Believe me, I had those thoughts. Is it worth it to keep going? But we did. We kept going in spite of that disruption or disappointment or potential division and my doubts. I don't want you to misinterpret this passage. Jesus wants to overcome the barriers that keep you from getting to the other side. And often we interpret this passage as Jesus wants to calm the storms in my life. And we lose sight of the fact that you know why he's calming the storm in your life? So that you can get to the other side. So that you can actually love that person on the other side. So you can actually go to people you would never go to in unfamiliar and difficult places and minister the gospel there. That's his goal. And that's why he's calming the storm here. There was a greater purpose. So it's not just about having a storm calmed in my life, but it's about God accomplishing his will in my life so that he can accomplish it in someone else's life that he's called me to. And Jesus' will is done. It's done in this passage. I love this. The sea and the wind obey him. Verse 39, he rebukes the sea and the wind. And that word rebukes means to properly assign value. He properly assigns values to the wind and the wave. It's used of paying taxes, this word. And so Jesus puts creation in its place. He's like the authoritative tax collector, and he demands payment from what he has created. He demands a payment of peace. He removes this barrier of the storm. This is how Eugene Peterson translates verse 39. He told the wind to pipe down and said to the sea, "Quiet, settle down." And the wind ran out of breath. He says, "Be still." A Greek word would actually means to muzzle. He muzzles the mouth of the storm. He binds up the bite of the storm. It was like this guard dog standing in the middle of the sea saying, "You're not going to make it to the other side." And that guard dog went from this terrible, snarling menace to this silent, meek little puppy. And they pass. So in overcoming the storm, he overcomes their doubts so that they can come over to the other side. Never, ever lose sight of the greater purpose of all this. Jesus cares for his disciples. He does. He proves it. And he cares for you enough to remove barriers for you so that you can accomplish his will. His character is definite. He is good, and he proves it here. The disciples can no longer doubt that he cares, and they must obey him just like the wind and the waves. Their fear here changes from cowardice to reverence. In verse 40, when he turns to them and he says, "Why are you so afraid?" This Greek word literally means cowardly. Why are you so cowardly? And then he says, do you still have no faith? In other words, he equates, you still have no faith with you being cowardly. Cowards have no confidence in the character of God. They will always doubt the goodness of God. So when a disaster comes along, when there's a natural disaster, or maybe there's some sort of terrorist attack, people doubt God's good character. Because if God is all powerful, then he's obviously not good, because he wouldn't have done this. If God is good and powerful, then he wouldn't have done it the way I would have done it. He would have done it differently. I mean, he would have done it the way I would have done it. Right? That's what we tend to think in moments like that. God can't be powerful and good, because if I were all powerful and good, I would have done it that way, and he chose not to. And what that ultimately means is I won't bow to such a God, which I think is cowardice. It's afraid of giving control over to a God that I don't fully understand. So I'm a coward. I back away. And cowards will put up a strong front, but inside they're afraid to admit that God is good. Psalm 10:4, in the pride of his face, the wicked does not seek him. All his thoughts are, there is no God. But in this moment, the disciples move beyond their cowardice. It's no longer, he doesn't care, he's not good. And they don't move to, he is good. What do they move to? He is God. He is God. That's more important. I may not even understand goodness now, but what I do know is he is God. And so their fear changes from cowardice to reverence. When it says they were filled with great fear in verse 41, it's not the same word as cowardly. It means to be awestruck, to be filled with reverence. Because Jesus' divinity has just been demonstrated. They see Jesus is God, and we must obey. They say in verse 41, who then is this? How can Jesus, the man who was just asleep in the back of the boat, do this? How can he demand something as though it were due to him? Here's why. John 1:3, all things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. All things bear the copyright seal of Jesus. So the disciples might have looked up into the clouds or into the waves, and they would have seen a sea with a circle around it, and afterwards, Jesus. Copyright Jesus. This is mine. I wrote it. I made it. And according to copyright law, the creator has the right to produce, reproduce, adapt, perform, translate, publish, display, rent, or distribute works in any way he pleases. Jesus shows his power. I hold the copyright to all this, and I can do what I will. Only God controls the wind and the waves in the scripture. So the disciples are thinking back. Did you see what he just did? Do you remember the flannel graph in our Torah class? Do you remember what happened in Psalm 107, 28-30? Do you remember this? Could this be what just happened? Psalm 107, then they cried to the Lord in their trouble. This was written a long time before this event. And he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. Then they were glad that the waters were quiet, and he brought them to their desired haven. He brought them to the other side. The disciples go, that's what Jesus just did and is doing. I don't even have the question, does he care anymore? He's God. And I'm going to obey him. He does care, by the way. He does. So the disciples realized that this sleeping man in the boat was actually the sovereign Lord. They realized that the groggy teacher is the great I am. And so when Jesus sends his disciples to the other side, he is going to remove the barriers if you'll just stay in the boat with him, because they're bound to come. So my question as we close for you is, will you row to the other side? Will you do it? Will you leave the crowd? Will you get in the boat? And will you go to an unfamiliar side, to people who are different, and love them and offer them the gospel? Because left to your own devices, I know that you would rather not go to different people and into unfamiliar places. I know that. So what is the other side for you? To whom might God be calling you this morning? Does someone, to some place come to mind for you? Where do you think the boat is heading for you? Maybe it's to join a missional family group here at the church, to minister to people you hadn't anticipated ministering to. Maybe it's considering missions. Maybe you would actually go to Spain or go somewhere else in the world that God is calling you to. Maybe it's simply to visit a neighbor or to actually talk to that person God is compelling you to talk to, or to volunteer to serve, or to build a bridge of reconciliation to people that you feel distant from. God has a mission. He has a desire and a will for the other side. He wants to deliver them, and he wants to give them life, and he wants you to go there with him. They're going to get to the other side of the sea, and they're going to find this demoniac who's filled with a legion of demons. And that man is going to be delivered miraculously at the hand of Jesus, given a new life, given a new hope. And at the end of chapter 5, it says of that man, he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis, the very place the disciples went, how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. This is the will of God, that we would cross over to the other side so that people like him can proclaim to the people they know Jesus, who wants to be known and to be made known to a people who have yet to know him. Will you row the boat? God's going to remove barriers, but you still have to row the boat. Chapter 5, verse 1 opens, they came to the other side of the sea. They get there. How? There's no wind anymore. The sea is glass. The sails are useless. They had to row. They had to put their hands to the oars and get to the other side by side. Disciples in the boat, hands on the oars, pulling, moving along the calm sea. And they make it to the other side, but understand this, just because you get to the other side, don't be surprised by what awaits. The sea may be calm, but the shore may be chaotic. They came to the other side of the sea, but verse 2 of chapter 5, when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. That man who lives in a place of death needs you. Needs you to go. Needs you to row the boat. Needs you to show Jesus to them. Lord, I pray that this motivation, that this vision that I hope I'm casting this morning would not be hindered at all by strategies that we get divided over, disruptions in our life, disappointments along the way. But Lord, give us the strength and the endurance to keep going for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of your kingdom. I pray this in your name. Amen. Amen.
Let's stand and sing in response.